Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. Leon Jacobs sat in his garage, the low hum of a fan the only sound cutting through the silence. He wiped the oil from his hands, staring blankly at the transmission he'd been working on. He should have felt pride in his work, after all. Restoring vintage cars had always been his passion, but something inside him was gnawing at his focus. That gnawing sensation had a name. Mia, his wife. Mia Jacobs was everything to him, or at least she had been. Lately, though, things were different. Mia had always been vibrant, full of life and energy. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and draw all eyes to her without saying a word. They'd been together for 6 years, married for 3. In those early years, Leon believed they were untouchable. But over the past few months, she had become distant, subtle at first, longer hours at work, unexplained late nights. But now it was becoming too obvious to ignore. She worked in marketing for high-end fashion, a job that constantly kept her busy. Leon, a mechanical engineer who also ran his own repair shop, was used to her being gone for extended hours. But this felt different. The text messages late at night, the quiet phone calls she would walk out of the room to take. Leon tried telling himself it was just his mind playing tricks, that maybe work really had gotten busier for her. Still, his instincts told him otherwise. Tonight, those instincts proved right. His phone buzzed on the workbench beside him, shaking him out of his daze. He picked it up, expecting a message from one of his clients, only to freeze at the sight of the text. It was from an unknown number. "Thought you want to see this. A friend." Attached was a picture, but Leon hesitated before opening it. His heart pounded in his chest, an uneasy mix of dread and anger swelling within him. With a deep breath, he tapped the image and everything inside him shattered. On the screen was a close-up shot of a man's private parts, unmistakably vulgar, with a caption underneath, "Your wife's favorite toy." For a moment, Leon felt frozen in place, his mind struggling to catch up with what he was looking at. Then, all at once, rage flooded through him, white-hot and blinding. He slammed the phone down on the workbench, its sharp crack echoing through the garage. His breaths came heavy and shallow, and his hands shook as he ran them through his short, dark hair. It was true. Everything he'd been sensing. The distance, the late nights. It all made sense now. Mia was cheating on him. Leon didn't sleep that night. Instead, he spent hours pacing the house, trying to decide what to do next. Confront her, demand answers, or simply walk away and never look back. No, he couldn't leave it at that. He needed proof, something undeniable. That photo alone wasn't enough. He needed more. When morning came, Mia was already gone, having left early for work as usual. Leon watched her car pull out of the driveway, and an unsettling coldness settled over him. The woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew, was lying to him every single day. Determined, he sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and accessed Mia's cloud storage. He wasn't a tech wizard, but he knew enough to navigate her account. As he scrolled through her photos, his heart sank deeper. Mixed in with harmless selfies and work events were explicit photos of her and another man. Leon stared at the images, bile rising in his throat. The man was unfamiliar, but the intimacy in the pictures was clear. This wasn't some fling. This had been going on for months. His name appeared in the metadata of one of the pictures, David Randall. A quick search on social media confirmed it. David was one of her colleagues, the same man she'd mentioned in passing, never giving him more than a casual reference. Colleague. Leon wanted to punch something, anything. The thought of confronting her right then burned in his chest. But that wouldn't be enough. He needed a plan. If he was going to end this, he needed to do it on his terms, his way. Leon spent the next week collecting evidence, biding his time. He installed hidden cameras around their house while Mia was at work, ensuring he could capture any interactions if she dared bring David to their home. He scored her text messages and emails, finding further proof of the affair. Every night, Maya would come home, acting as if nothing was wrong. And every night, Leon felt the resentment boil inside him. But he played his part. He smiled. He made small talk. He kept the facade going until he was ready to make his move. Friday arrived, and Leon knew what he had to do. He waited until Maya left for the office, as she always did on Fridays. He could tell she was distracted that morning, hurriedly gathering her things without even offering her usual perfunctory kiss on the cheek. He knew why. David had sent her a message that morning, one Leon had intercepted on her phone. "Can't wait to see you later." Once Mia was gone, Leon got to work. He emptied their joint bank accounts into his personal account quietly, without a trace, and packed up everything that mattered to him. His clothes, his tools, the few personal keepsakes he couldn't live without. He wanted to leave no part of himself behind. By the time he was done, the house was stripped of anything that carried meaning. All that remained were the cold, material things, furniture, appliances, decor that Mia had picked out. The house now felt as empty as his marriage had become. Before leaving, Leon made one final deliberate move. He printed out the photos of Mia and David, every graphic, explicit shot, and taped them to the walls in every room. The bedroom, the living room, even the kitchen. A gallery of betrayal for her to walk through when she came home. Then he printed out the cruelest picture, the one David had sent him, the one that started it all. He taped it to the front door with a note attached. "I hope it tasted good." Leon wasn't done. He walked into their bedroom, where they had once shared so much, and placed a stack of papers on her side of the bed. The divorce papers. On top of them, a flash drive containing every piece of evidence he'd gathered. Texts, emails, photos. He wanted her to know that he wasn't some fool she could manipulate. He'd seen everything. He knew everything. Finally, he placed a letter on top of the pile. It was short, blunt, and final. "By the time you see this, everyone will know. Everything will be online." With one last glance around the empty room, Leon walked out. He didn't look back. When Mia came home that evening, she was buzzing with excitement. David had promised they'd take a weekend trip soon, just the two of them, maybe to Risdale or a cabin up in the Redwood Range. She had become so comfortable with the lie she was living, so accustomed to sneaking around behind Leon's back that she didn't even consider the consequences anymore. As she pulled into the driveway, she noticed the front door slightly ajar. Her brow furrowed, and she approached cautiously. Leon never left the door unlocked. When she stepped inside, the first thing that caught her eye was the picture on the door. Her stomach dropped. The grotesque image of David's private parts, the one he'd sent Leon, was taped to the front door along with the note. "I hope it tasted good." Mia's heart began to race as panic set in. She rushed through the house, her breath catching in her throat when she saw the photos taped to the walls. Photos of her and David in intimate, compromising positions. It was all there for her to see. "Leon," she called out, her voice cracking with desperation. "Leon." No answer. She ran upstairs to the bedroom. And that's when she saw it. The divorce papers neatly placed on the bed, the flash drive beside them. Her hands trembled as she picked up the letter on top. Her eyes scanned the words, and her legs gave out beneath her. "By the time you see this, everyone will know. Everything will be online." The letter slipped from her fingers, and she collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her face. Everything was falling apart. Everything. The house was eerily quiet as Mia sat on the floor, her chest heaving with sobs. The divorce papers were still in her hands, trembling uncontrollably. The silence around her seemed to amplify every thought racing through her mind. How did this happen? How did Leon find out? Her thoughts spiraled, replaying the image of David's obscene photo plastered on the door, the pictures of their affair taped to the walls, like a nightmare come to life. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out with shaky hands, her fingers smudging the screen as she wiped her tears away. It was David. His name alone filled her with dread. "Hey, baby," he said when she answered, his voice casual, oblivious to the storm that had just crashed into her life. "David." Her voice cracked. "He knows. Leon knows everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then a sharp inhale. "What do you mean he knows?" "He's gone." Mia choked, barely able to get the words out. "He left me. The house is empty. And the photos. He left the photos, David, of us, and a letter saying he's posting everything online." Silence. David's tone changed instantly, turning cold. "What photos? What the hell are you talking about?" Mia's grip tightened on the phone. "He has pictures of us, all of them, every single one. I don't know how, maybe from my phone or my computer. And that picture you sent him, your D." She couldn't finish the sentence, the humiliation too much to bear. "Jesus Christ," David muttered under his breath. "All right, calm down. We need to figure this out." "Figure this out?" Maya snapped, her anger flaring through her tears. "My marriage is over, David. He's destroyed everything. And now he's threatening to post it all online." David paused. His next words were steady but void of any empathy. "Listen, you need to stay calm. He might just be bluffing. Leon's always been level-headed. He's not going to destroy his own reputation over this." Mia froze. For a brief second, David's lack of concern sent a wave of nausea through her. He was speaking like it didn't matter, like she was the one who needed to just get over it. Her heart twisted painfully. "You don't understand. He's serious. He's not weak, David. If he said he's going to do it, he's going to do it." "I'll handle it," David said, his voice clipped now. "I'll talk to my contacts and see if I can get ahead of this. But you need to relax and stay out of the public eye for now. This will blow over." Mia hung up without saying goodbye. She couldn't listen to him anymore. David's detachment only made her feel more alone in the mess she created. Meanwhile, Leon sat in his workshop, his hands stained with oil, but his mind focused elsewhere. The memory of Mia's betrayal was a constant drumbeat in his head, but he had learned how to channel that anger. Right now, it was fueling him as he worked on his next step. The revenge wasn't over. Far from it. He opened his laptop and began creating an anonymous account on a popular gossip forum. A place notorious for airing dirty laundry. A place where stories spread like wildfire. He crafted his post carefully, making sure every word stung. He started by introducing himself as a betrayed husband and described in detail how his wife of 3 years had been having an affair with one of her colleagues. He attached the pictures, every damning one of them, and added a few more screenshots of the text messages between Mia and David. The post was brutal, but it needed to be. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted humiliation. And not just for Mia. David deserved to go down just as hard. Finally, he clicked post. Within hours, it spread like a virus. Comments flooded in, some expressing shock, others disgust. A few people recognized Mia's name and tagged her company. By the end of the day, the post had gained hundreds of shares, and people were whispering in her professional circles. Leon watched the chaos unfold, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. Mia had destroyed everything they'd built, and now she would pay for it. Mia's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. By the next day, the situation had spiraled completely out of control. Her coworkers were texting her, asking if she'd seen the posts online. Her boss had left 2 voicemails, his voice filled with concern and underlying anger. She scrolled through the gossip site in disbelief. There was her entire affair plastered across the internet. The pictures, the texts, everything. Comments were pouring in, and every single one felt like a dagger. She was being called names: homewrecker, cheater, shameless. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely type as she tried to contact David again. When he finally picked up, his voice was tight. "What the hell's going on, David?" she demanded, pacing her bedroom. The walls were still adorned with the pictures Leon had left. "Why aren't you doing anything? It's getting worse." "I told you, I'm handling it," David replied sharply. "I've been talking to some people. It's damage control. You need to stop panicking." "Stop panicking." Mia's voice rose. "My life is falling apart. My job is on the line. My boss called me this morning and said they're considering letting me go. This isn't just some minor scandal, David. This is my entire career." "Well, maybe if you'd been more careful." David stopped himself, but the words had already slipped out. Maya felt the weight of his accusation hit her like a punch to the gut. "Are you blaming this on me now?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You sent that photo. You knew what we were doing. And now you want to act like I should have been more careful." David didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone was clipped. "Look, I don't have time for this right now. I'm trying to protect both of us. But if you keep freaking out, it's only going to make things worse." The phone call ended abruptly, leaving Mia alone in her bedroom, the silence closing in around her. She stared at the divorce papers on the bed, her mind racing. What am I going to do? The next morning, her worst fears were confirmed. Maya received an official email from her company. They were placing her on indefinite leave due to the negative publicity. They couldn't afford the scandal to affect their brand image. Her hands went limp, the phone falling to the floor. Her career was slipping away, and David, her so-called lover, was nowhere to be found. Leon had expected this fallout. He knew Maya's professional world would collapse under the weight of her public humiliation, and David, that smug, arrogant man, would crumble with her. But there was more to be done. He wasn't done watching them suffer. He didn't just want to end the affair. He wanted to ruin them both. David had always seemed like a slippery guy, and Leon was sure this wasn't his first affair. He hired a private investigator to dig deeper into David's past. The man was thorough, and within days, he came back with exactly what Leon needed. David had a pattern: an affair at his previous job with another married woman, harassment claims that were settled quietly, and even a few shady business deals that had left several of his clients out of pocket. Leon smiled grimly. This was the final piece. He gathered everything, all the dirt on David, and sent it anonymously to the gossip sites. By the next day, the internet was buzzing again. Not only was David now publicly labeled a homewrecker, but his history of unethical behavior came to light as well. His professional network turned on him. Jobs started slipping away, and his carefully crafted reputation as a marketing genius was in tatters. Mia's phone calls to David became more desperate, but he started answering less frequently, his responses short and dismissive. Their relationship, built on lies and deceit, was crumbling under the weight of the fallout. The affair that had once seemed thrilling was now a source of deep regret for both of them. Leon paced back and forth outside the sleek, glass-walled office building where David worked. He had been here before, on the day he had sent the damning photograph to Mia, and watched her crumble. But today wasn't about Mia. This was about David, the man who had paraded himself into Leon's life, wrecked his marriage, and left a wake of destruction. He clenched his fists, the rage bubbling beneath his skin. He was prepared this time. Leon wasn't a man who allowed his emotions to get the better of him, but the calculated anger he felt needed release. Today, he'd make sure David felt every bit of it. David emerged from the building, all smug confidence. His tailored suit and designer watch made him look every bit the part of a successful businessman. But Leon knew the truth. Behind the facade, David was little more than a fraud, a man who had no problem lying, cheating, and manipulating to get what he wanted. As David turned toward the parking lot, Leon moved to intercept him. His broad shoulders blocked David's path, and when David saw him, The sneer on his face faltered for a split second. "Leon," David said, raising an eyebrow. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" His voice was laced with sarcasm, as if Leon was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Leon stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "We need to talk." David smirked. "Oh, I think we've said all we need to say. You had your little meltdown. What, you want to try and throw another punch?" "No," Leon said calmly. "This isn't about me and you throwing fists. I came to warn you." David chuckled, but it was forced, like he didn't quite believe Leon's composure. "Warn me about what?" "You might think you've gotten away with this," Leon said, his voice cold. "You might think that humiliating me was the endgame. But this is just the beginning." David shifted uneasily. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You've got some skeletons in your closet, David," Leon said, his voice low and menacing. "And I'm going to make sure the whole world sees them. You're not just some innocent guy who got caught up in an affair. You're a liar, a cheater, and a thief. And I've got proof." David's cocky grin vanished, replaced by a wary, guarded expression. "You don't know what you're talking about." Leon leaned in, his voice low. "I know more than you think. And when I'm done, you won't just lose Mia. You'll lose your job, your reputation, everything." David's jaw tightened. "You can't touch me. You're just a mechanic. No one's going to believe anything you say." Leon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see about that." Without another word, Leon turned on his heel and walked away, leaving David standing there, visibly shaken. Mia sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. She hadn't heard from David in days, and the silence was starting to gnaw at her. She had made mistake after mistake, and now everything was falling apart. Leon was gone. Her career was hanging by a thread. And David, her supposed lover, was nowhere to be found. She dialed his number again, hoping he would answer this time. It rang once, twice, and then went to voicemail. "David, it's me," she said, her voice wavering. "I really need to talk to you. Things are getting worse, and I don't know what to do. Please call me back." She hung up and let out a frustrated sigh, leaning back against the headrest. The weight of her decisions pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had been selfish, chasing after excitement and passion without thinking of the consequences. Now she was left with nothing but regret. Her phone buzzed, and for a brief moment, she hoped it was David. But when she glanced at the screen, her stomach dropped. It was an email from her boss. Her hands shook as she opened it, and her heart sank as she read the words. "Due to recent developments, we have decided to part ways. We can no longer have you associated with our firm." Mia stared at the screen, the words blurring as tears welled up in her eyes. She had been fired. The affair had cost her everything: her marriage, her career, her dignity. And now, David wasn't even answering her calls. She drove aimlessly for hours, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, she found herself parked outside David's apartment building. She hesitated for a moment before getting out of the car and walking up to his door. She knocked, her heart pounding in her chest. After a few moments, the door opened, and there stood David, looking irritated. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. Mia blinked, taken aback by his tone. "I needed to talk to you. Things are falling apart, and I don't know what to do." David sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, Mia, I'm not your therapist. I've got my own problems to deal with." Mia's chest tightened. "But I thought we were in this together. You said you loved me." David scoffed. "Love? Come on, Mia, don't be naive. This was just fun. You knew that." Mia felt like the floor had been ripped out from under her. "You don't mean that." David crossed his arms, his expression hard. "I do. You need to stop acting like this is some kind of fairy tale. It's over, okay? Move on." Mia's mind raced, her heart shattering into pieces. She had destroyed her life for this man, and now he was casting her aside like She meant nothing. "You're just going to throw me away?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. David shrugged. "I've got bigger things to worry about. You should too." Before she could respond, he stepped back and shut the door in her face, leaving her standing there in shock. Leon sat in his office at the auto shop, his laptop open in front of him. He had spent the past few weeks gathering every piece of dirt he could find on David, and now he had everything he needed. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the work he had done. He wasn't a vengeful man by nature, but David and Mia had pushed him too far. They had played with his life, his emotions, and his marriage. Now it was time for them to face the consequences. With a few clicks, Leon sent the files to the local media outlets, every detail of David's shady business deals, his affair with Mia, and the humiliation he had orchestrated. David's career was over. Leon didn't care what happened to Mia at this point. She had made her choices, but David, he needed to be brought down. As Leon closed his laptop, a strange sense of calm settled over him. He had taken back control of his life. He had done what he needed to do to protect himself, to ensure that no one would ever take advantage of him again. The divorce papers were finalized, and Mia was no longer a part of his life. He had his business, his friends, and his dignity intact. And now, as David's downfall unfolded in the public eye, Leon felt a sense of closure. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. The heavy silence of Leon's workshop hung in the air, thick with tension. Maya stood a few feet away from him, her chest tight with fear and guilt. She had imagined this confrontation for days, hoping there might still be a chance to salvage something, even if it was just closure. But seeing Leon now, his broad back turned to her as he worked on a car engine, any hope she had left began to evaporate. "Leon," Maya repeated softly, as if saying his name could somehow break the ice between them. Leon set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a rag, still refusing to face her. "What's there to talk about, Mia?" His voice was low, controlled, but beneath that calm exterior, Mia could hear the simmering anger. "I just need to explain." Maya started, but Leon finally turned, cutting her off with a look that stopped her in her tracks. His eyes, once warm and full of love, were cold and unrecognizable now. "Explain," he said, his tone sharp. "You want to explain how you destroyed our marriage, how you lied to my face for months, or maybe you want to explain how you and your lover thought you could get away with humiliating me." He stepped closer, his face hardening with each word. Mia's lips trembled. She had imagined tears, apologies, maybe even the faintest sliver of forgiveness, but Leon's resolve was unyielding. She had underestimated the depth of the damage she had caused. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Never meant for it to go this far," Leon repeated, his voice rising. "Mia, you didn't just cheat. You lied to me for months. And then your lover," his voice dripped with disgust at the word, "sent me that disgusting picture as a joke. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice you made over and over again." Mia flinched. "I was confused. Things between us were strained. You were always busy with work, and I felt neglected." She was grasping for excuses, trying to justify what she had done. Leon's eyes narrowed. "Neglected? So instead of talking to me like an adult, you ran to David. You think that makes it okay? You think that's an excuse?" Mia's throat tightened. "I know I was wrong," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I know I hurt you, but please, Leon, we were good once. We can be again. We just need to talk this through." For a moment, there was silence between them, a thick tension hanging in the air. Leon finally shook his head, his expression hard. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said quietly. "There's no we anymore. You killed it the moment you decided he was worth more than our marriage." Mia's heart sank. "Please, just give me a chance. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I'll make this right." Leon's face remained unreadable, but his voice was firm. The only thing you can do is sign the divorce papers. David sat in his expensive apartment, a drink in his hand, staring at the news on his phone. He had managed to avoid the worst of the scandal for a few days, but now it was catching up to him. The gossip sites had not only exposed the affair, but also dragged his past into the light. Clients were pulling out of deals, his reputation in shambles. The phone rang, and he sighed, knowing it was Mia before he even picked up. He answered with an irritated sigh. "What now?" "They fired me." Mia's voice came through, broken and small. "I'm finished. They said they couldn't be associated with the scandal." David leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, well, what did you expect? This whole thing was bound to blow up in our faces. You said you would handle it." Mia shot back, her voice cracking with frustration and fear. "You said this would blow over, but it's getting worse." David's patience snapped. "What do you want me to do, Mia? This is as much your fault as it is mine. You're the one who couldn't keep your marriage together." Mia's voice faltered. "You don't even care, do you? I'm losing everything, and you're acting like this is just some inconvenience." "Of course I care," David snapped, "but panicking won't solve anything. You're the one who wanted this, remember? You came to me." Mia felt the final threads of her world unraveling. "I thought you loved me," she whispered. David scoffed. "Love? We were having fun, Mia. That's all this ever was. And now that fun's over." The coldness in his words hit Mia like a slap. "So what? You're just walking away?" David sighed, already bored of the conversation. "Look, I've got my own problems to deal with. We both knew this couldn't last. Just do yourself a favor and let it go." Before she could respond, he hung up. Mia stared at the phone, her hands trembling. Everything she had sacrificed for David, all the lies, the betrayal, it had all been for nothing. He had used her, and now he was abandoning her in the wreckage of her life. Leon had been watching David's downfall from afar with quiet satisfaction. The private investigator had done his job well, and now David's world was collapsing, just like Mia's. But Leon wasn't finished yet. He needed to make sure they both felt the full weight of what they had done. They had taken everything from him, and he was determined to return the favor. Leon had been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering every piece of evidence, every scrap of information he could use. He knew David was facing financial ruin, and he knew that Mia had been fired, but he wanted to ensure they wouldn't recover. They had taken everything from him, and he was determined to see it through. Leon's final move was simple but devastating. He contacted one of the biggest firms in the city, the one David had been trying to land a deal with for months. Through his contacts, Leon leaked all the information he had on David's shady business deals, along with the personal scandal. The firm immediately pulled their offer, and word spread quickly. David's name was now poison in the business world. The last step was Mia. Leon knew she was struggling, desperate to find some way out of the mess she had created. She had tried calling him several times, but he ignored her, waiting for the right moment. Finally, he called her back. "Leon, please, we need to talk." Mia's voice was pleading, broken. "I don't know what to do. I've lost everything. Can't we just sit down and figure this out?" Leon's voice was calm but icy. "There's nothing to figure out, Mia. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." "I know I hurt you," she cried. "But please, I'll do anything. I can't live like this. You have to give me a chance." Leon paused for a long moment, then spoke slowly, deliberately. "You had your chance, Mia, and you chose him. Now you'll live with the consequences of that decision." Mia sobbed into the phone, but Leon felt no sympathy. "Goodbye, Mia," he said, his voice final. "I hope it was worth it." He hung up, the sound of her crying fading into silence. Leon felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. The revenge was complete. He had lost his marriage, but he had taken control of his life again. Mia and David would never forget what they had done to him. As he stood in his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade, Leon allowed himself one last look at the past. Then he turned away, ready to move forward into a future that was his alone. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.